WWE just proved they learned nothing from the backlash over bringing Hulk Hogan back after his racist scandal, and what they did on SmackDown's tribute show has wrestling fans absolutely livid across social media tonight. While new disturbing details about Hogan's final moments emerge from the Clearwater Police Department, Cody Rhodes stood in that ring and had the audacity to call Hogan's legacy complicated, while Triple H broke down in tears during a 10-bell salute that has become the most controversial tribute in WWE history. You thought the internet was divided when Hogan died. Wait until you hear what WWE actually said and didn't say during their so-called tribute show that has fans calling for boycotts, current wrestlers privately expressing disgust, and industry insiders questioning whether WWE has completely lost touch with reality. This isn't just about honoring a deceased wrestler anymore, this is about WWE's complete moral bankruptcy being exposed on live television. Before we dive into WWE's tone-deaf tribute disaster, let's talk about the new medical details that emerged about Hogan's death that paint a much darker picture than the sanitized version WWE presented to their audience. According to the Clearwater Police Department, officers were called to Hogan's home just before 10 a.m. on Thursday morning regarding a cardiac arrest, and he was transported to Morton Plant Hospital where he was pronounced dead at 11:17 a.m. But here's what WWE conveniently left out of their tribute video package. Hogan had reportedly been experiencing weeks of declining health leading up to his cardiac arrest, and he was surrounded by family at the time of his death. The police investigation is ongoing, though authorities have stated there were no signs of suspicious activity. What makes this even more disturbing is that Hogan's death at 71 follows decades of physical strain from wrestling, with doctors discussing cardiac arrest risks and a history of concerning habits. WWE knew about Hogan's declining health, they knew about his decades of physical problems, and yet they chose to focus their tribute on his contributions to wrestling while completely glossing over the reality of what wrestling did to his body. This is typical WWE, sanitize the story, ignore the uncomfortable truths, and present a clean narrative that protects their brand while disrespecting both the deceased and their audience's intelligence. The medical details paint a picture of a man whose body was destroyed by the very industry now profiting from his death, but WWE doesn't want to have that conversation because it might hurt their precious image. Now let's talk about the absolute travesty that opened SmackDown on Friday night. The show opened with the roster on the stage for a 10-bell salute for Hogan, with Triple H speaking about losing a globally recognized icon, and saying he was honored to call him friend. The sight of Triple H breaking down in tears during his speech has been shared across social media, but what fans are calling out is the complete hypocrisy of this emotional display. This is the same Triple H who was part of WWE management when they made the decision to completely erase Hogan from company history after his racist recordings surfaced in 2015. The same Triple H who signed off on removing Hogan's Hall of Fame profile, pulling his merchandise, and pretending he never existed. The same Triple H who was involved in the corporate decision to quietly bring Hogan back in 2018 without any real accountability or meaningful apology process. So when Triple H stands there with tears in his eyes talking about what a great man Hogan was, wrestling fans see right through the performance. These aren't tears of genuine grief, they're tears of corporate manipulation designed to make WWE look compassionate while avoiding any real discussion of why Hogan's relationship with the company was so problematic in the first place. The 10-bell salute itself has become a lightning rod for controversy because it represents everything wrong with how WWE handles difficult situations. They want the emotional impact of honoring a legend without taking responsibility for their role in legitimizing his return to the company after his scandals. They want to profit from the nostalgia and goodwill while pretending the ugly parts of his legacy don't exist. Wrestling fans on Twitter are calling it performative grief and corporate theater, and they're absolutely right. This isn't about honoring Hulk Hogan, it's about WWE trying to control the narrative around his death to protect their own image and avoid uncomfortable questions about their decision-making process. But if you thought Triple H's fake tears were bad, wait until you hear what happened when Cody Rhodes took the microphone during the tribute segment. Rhodes discussed Hogan's death and admitted that there were complicated details to Hogan's legacy, making sure to thank Hogan despite his complicated legacy. On the surface, this might seem like Rhodes trying to acknowledge the controversial aspects of Hogan's career, but the way he handled it has fans absolutely furious. The problem isn't that Rhodes acknowledged Hogan's complicated legacy, it's that he did it in the most cowardly, corporate-approved way possible. He mentioned the complications, but didn't specify what they were. He thanked Hogan despite these complications without explaining why someone with such a problematic history deserves thanks. He essentially tried to have it both ways, appearing thoughtful and nuanced while actually saying nothing of substance. This is exactly the kind of mealy-mouthed corporate speak that wrestling fans are sick of hearing from WWE. Either condemn Hogan's racist statements and explain why you're still honoring him, or fully embrace celebrating his wrestling contributions. Don't give us this wishy-washy middle ground that satisfies nobody and insults everyone's intelligence. The reaction on social media has been swift and brutal. Fans are calling Rhodes a corporate puppet, and demanding he explain exactly what complicated details he was referring to. Others are pointing out the absurdity of thanking someone for their contributions while simultaneously acknowledging that their legacy is problematic without explaining how those two things can coexist. This is the problem with WWE's current approach to controversial figures. They want to acknowledge that problems exist without actually addressing what those problems are or taking a meaningful stance on them. It's corporate cowardice disguised as nuanced thinking, and wrestling fans see right through it. What's even more telling than what was said during WWE's tribute show is what wasn't said and who chose not to participate in the emotional displays. While the cameras focused on Triple H's tears and Cody Rhodes' carefully crafted comments, they conspicuously avoided showing the reactions of many wrestlers who were clearly uncomfortable with the entire situation. Sources backstage at SmackDown are reporting that multiple wrestlers expressed private concerns about participating in such an elaborate tribute to someone whose racist statements had caused so much pain within the wrestling community. Several black wrestlers on the roster were reportedly uncomfortable with the 10-bell salute format, feeling that it elevated Hogan to the same level as universally beloved figures who had received similar tributes. The women's roster was also notably absent from many of the tribute segments, which makes sense given Hogan's documented history of sexist comments and his resistance to women's wrestling receiving equal treatment during his peak years of influence. Their absence speaks louder than any words could about how they really feel about honoring someone who actively worked against their interests in the industry. Current wrestlers are in an impossible position when it comes to situations like this. They can't speak honestly about their feelings regarding controversial figures without risking their jobs, but their participation in tribute shows gets interpreted as endorsement of that person's entire legacy. WWE puts them in these situations knowing they have no choice but to comply, regardless of their personal feelings. The fact that so many wrestlers chose minimal participation or stayed completely silent during the tribute segments tells you everything you need to know about how they really feel about Hulk Hogan's legacy. Their silence is louder than Triple H's tears or Cody Rhodes' corporate-approved comments. To understand why fans are so angry about WWE's Hogan tribute, you need to look at the company's history of selective memory when it comes to honoring deceased wrestlers. WWE has a clear pattern of giving elaborate tributes to wrestlers whose legacies align with their corporate image while minimizing or ignoring those who don't fit their preferred narrative. Compare the Hogan tribute to how WWE handled other controversial figures who passed away. When wrestlers with complicated legacies died, WWE often provided minimal coverage or focused exclusively on their in-ring contributions while avoiding any discussion of their personal controversies. But with Hogan, they're going full-scale tribute mode despite his legacy being arguably more problematic than many others who received less fanfare. This selective treatment reveals WWE's true priorities. They're not interested in consistent standards or genuine respect for the deceased. They're interested in maximizing publicity and controlling narratives in ways that benefit their brand. Hogan gets the full tribute treatment because he was profitable for WWE, not because he was a better person than other wrestlers who received less recognition. The hypocrisy becomes even more obvious when you consider how WWE treated Hogan while he was alive. They erased him from company history when his scandals became public, then quietly brought him back when they decided the financial benefits outweighed the reputational risks. Now in death, they're treating him like a beloved legend who never had any controversies at all. This pattern of corporate manipulation is exactly why wrestling fans have become so cynical about WWE's tribute shows and public statements. They've learned not to trust the company's emotional displays because they've seen how quickly those emotions can change based on business considerations rather than genuine feelings or consistent moral standards. The reaction to WWE's Hogan tribute on social media has been absolutely volcanic, with wrestling fans expressing outrage that goes far beyond typical internet complaints. Twitter, Instagram, and Reddit are flooded with posts calling out WWE's hypocrisy, demanding explanations for their tribute decisions, and organizing potential boycotts of upcoming programming. The hashtag WWE hypocrisy started trending within hours of the SmackDown tribute, with fans posting side-by-side comparisons of WWE's current Hogan praise with their previous statements about his racist comments being unacceptable. The contrast is so stark that even casual fans are starting to question WWE's credibility and moral consistency. YouTube wrestling channels are seeing massive spikes in views for videos criticizing WWE's handling of the tribute, with creators who normally avoid controversial topics feeling compelled to address the obvious problems with how the company is handling Hogan's death. The engagement on these critical videos is far outpacing the positive reaction to WWE's official tribute content. Facebook wrestling groups are experiencing the same heated debates we saw immediately after Hogan's death, but now with the added element of anger toward WWE's specific choices in how they presented the tribute. Group moderators are struggling to maintain order as discussions spiral into arguments about corporate responsibility, moral consistency, and whether fans should continue supporting a company that makes such obvious hypocritical decisions. The most damaging aspect of the social media backlash is that it's not just coming from wrestling fans who were already critical of WWE. Mainstream social media users who don't typically follow wrestling are sharing clips of the tribute and expressing confusion about why a company would honor someone with such a problematic recent history. This broader criticism threatens to damage WWE's mainstream reputation in ways that might actually impact their business. WWE's handling of the Hogan tribute reveals fundamental truths about the company's values that go far beyond just this one situation. Their decision-making process around controversial figures shows that they prioritize profits and nostalgia over moral consistency and genuine accountability. The elaborate nature of the tribute, complete with emotional speeches, video packages, and full roster participation, sends a clear message that past controversies can be overcome if someone was profitable enough for the company. This isn't about forgiveness or redemption. It's about WWE deciding that Hogan's value to their brand outweighs the harm caused by his racist statements and other problematic behavior. This approach creates a dangerous precedent for how WWE will handle future controversial situations. Current wrestlers and industry observers are taking notes about what behaviors the company will ultimately tolerate and forgive versus what will result in permanent consequences. The message being sent is that if you were valuable enough to the company, your legacy will be protected regardless of your personal failings. The timing of bringing Hogan back in 2018 and now giving him a full tribute in death shows that WWE's decisions about controversial figures are based entirely on business calculations rather than moral principles. They waited until they believed the financial benefits outweighed the reputational risks, then proceeded as if his scandals never happened. This corporate cynicism is exactly why so many wrestling fans have become disillusioned with WWE as a company. They've watched the organization make decisions based purely on profit motives while presenting themselves as having genuine values and caring about their community. The Hogan situation is just the most obvious recent example of this pattern. The controversy over WWE's Hogan tribute has implications that extend far beyond just one company's decision about how to honor a deceased wrestler. It's forcing the entire wrestling industry to confront uncomfortable questions about how it handles problematic figures and what message it sends to current and future performers. Other wrestling promotions are watching WWE's handling of this situation carefully, knowing that their own responses will be scrutinized and compared. AEW, Impact Wrestling, and independent promotions are all having internal discussions about how to address Hogan's death and legacy without either seeming disrespectful to the deceased or endorsing problematic behavior. Wrestling schools and training facilities are dealing with questions from students about how to process this situation and what it means for their own future careers. Young wrestlers are seeing how the industry handles controversial figures and making judgments about what behaviors will be tolerated and what consequences they might face for their own actions. The broadcast partners and sponsors who work with WWE are also taking notice of how the company handles situations like this. Corporate partners are increasingly sensitive to being associated with organizations that make decisions that could damage their own brands, and WWE's handling of controversial figures affects those business relationships. Wrestling media outlets are struggling with how to cover this story without either seeming to attack a recently deceased person or failing to address the legitimate concerns about WWE's decision-making process. The balance between respectful coverage and honest journalism is particularly difficult when the subject matter involves such heated emotions and strong opinions. The reaction to WWE's Hogan tribute has exposed the same generational divide in wrestling fandom that we saw immediately after his death, but now with the added complexity of fans having to react to WWE's specific choices about how to handle the situation. Older fans who grew up during Hulkamania are more likely to support WWE's decision to give Hogan a full tribute, viewing it as appropriate respect for someone who was instrumental in making wrestling mainstream. They see the criticism as excessive focus on past mistakes that shouldn't overshadow his contributions to the industry. Younger fans are more likely to view WWE's tribute as tone-deaf and hypocritical, pointing out the inconsistency between the company's previous condemnation of Hogan's racist statements and their current celebration of his legacy. They see it as evidence that WWE doesn't actually care about the values they claim to represent. This generational split is creating fractures within wrestling fan communities that may be difficult to repair. Older and younger fans are not just disagreeing about Hogan specifically, but about broader questions of how the wrestling industry should handle its problematic past and what standards should be applied to evaluating wrestling legends. The divide is also affecting how different wrestling content creators approach covering this story. Podcasters and YouTubers who cater to older audiences are more likely to focus on Hogan's wrestling contributions and criticize the backlash against WWE's tribute. Those who cater to younger audiences are more likely to focus on the problematic aspects of his legacy and WWE's hypocrisy. This generational tension within wrestling fandom reflects broader cultural debates about accountability, forgiveness, and how society should handle problematic figures from the past. Wrestling is just the arena where these larger cultural conflicts are playing out. WWE's decision to give Hulk Hogan such an elaborate tribute wasn't based on emotional attachment or genuine respect. It was the result of cold corporate calculations about profit, publicity, and protecting their historical narrative. Understanding these business motivations helps explain why the tribute felt so hollow and manipulative to many viewers. From a financial perspective, Hogan remains one of WWE's most valuable historical assets. His image and legacy are tied to some of their most profitable periods and most successful mainstream crossover moments. Honoring him with a major tribute helps maintain the value of that intellectual property and keeps the door open for future monetization of his likeness and career highlights. The tribute also serves WWE's ongoing efforts to control the narrative around their own history. By presenting Hogan as a beloved legend worthy of tears and 10-bell salutes, they're trying to establish that version of his story as the official one. This helps them avoid uncomfortable questions about their own decision-making regarding his scandals and return to the company. There's also a publicity calculation at work. Controversial tributes generate more media coverage and social media engagement than straightforward ones. WWE benefits from the attention and discussion, even when much of it is negative, because it keeps their programming relevant and drives viewership from people who want to see what all the fuss is about. The timing of the tribute, coming just days after Hogan's death, was designed to take advantage of the immediate emotional impact while avoiding giving critics time to organize more effective responses. By moving quickly with a full-scale tribute, WWE hoped to establish their preferred narrative before opposition could gain momentum. This corporate cynicism is exactly why the tribute felt so inauthentic to many viewers. It wasn't about honoring a person, it was about managing a brand asset and controlling a narrative for business purposes. The controversy over WWE's Hogan tribute is a defining moment that will influence how the wrestling industry handles similar situations for years to come. The reaction has been so intense and divided that it's forcing everyone involved to reconsider their approaches to controversial figures and legacy management. For WWE specifically, the backlash may influence how they handle future deaths of problematic wrestling figures. They're seeing that their attempt to present a sanitized, corporate-approved version of Hogan's legacy has backfired and created more controversy than if they had either fully embraced celebrating him or acknowledged his problems more directly. Current wrestlers are taking notes about what this situation reveals about WWE's values and decision-making process. They're seeing that the company will ultimately prioritize business considerations over moral consistency, which affects how they think about their own careers and the potential consequences of their actions. The wrestling media is being forced to develop better frameworks for covering these types of situations. The traditional approach of either completely celebrating or completely condemning deceased figures is proving inadequate for handling complex legacies that include both significant contributions and serious problems. Fans are also evolving in how they think about wrestling history and the figures they choose to celebrate. The Hogan situation is teaching them to be more critical consumers of wrestling content and more demanding of consistency from the companies they support. The broader entertainment industry is watching how wrestling handles these situations because similar challenges exist across all forms of media. The lessons learned from the Hogan controversy will influence how other industries approach their own problematic historical figures. Ultimately, the explosive reaction to WWE's Hulk Hogan tribute forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about wrestling and the heroes we create within this industry. Wrestling has always been built on larger-than-life characters who are inevitably flawed human beings, and we've never developed healthy ways to handle the disconnect between the characters and the people who portray them. Hogan's death and WWE's response to it represents everything that's wrong with how wrestling deals with its past: the selective memory, the corporate manipulation, the prioritizing of nostalgia and profit over honesty and accountability. But it also represents an opportunity for the industry to finally grow up and develop more mature approaches to these complex situations. The wrestling community's divided reaction shows that we're at a crossroads. We can continue accepting the corporate-approved sanitized versions of wrestling history, or we can demand more honesty, consistency, and moral courage from the companies that profit from our fandom. The choice we make about how to handle the Hogan legacy will determine whether wrestling evolves into a more accountable and honest industry or continues repeating the same patterns of hypocrisy and moral cowardice that have defined so much of its past. What's your take on WWE's handling of the Hogan tribute? Did they make the right choice, or should they have approached it differently? Are you satisfied with Cody Rhodes' complicated legacy? Comment. Or do you want more specific acknowledgement of what those complications actually were? The comments section is already exploding with reactions, and this conversation is far from over. Let me know where you stand on this defining moment in wrestling history. If you thought tonight's story was wild, trust me, what happens next will blow your mind. So don't stop now. Click on the video right here on your screen to continue the chaos, the drama, and the inside scoop only we deliver. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and join the Wrestling News CC family, where the real stories of WWE come to life. See you in the next one.